Woo! I survived! Hey guys, welcome back. Today we have the spoiler talk for The Only Survivors. This was the book of the month spoiler talk poll winner. I was pretty into this being the winner. I've been enjoying thrillers more and more these days, so I was excited to see how this one was going to go. Do remember, if you want to vote in the next month's poll for the spoiler talk, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. The Only Survivors is a book centering on Cassidy, and she is one of 7 remaining survivors of a van crash that occurred when she was in high school on a school trip. The book focuses on the 10-year anniversary of them meeting up, and it covers the week from Sunday to Sunday from Cassidy's point of view. Also throughout the book, we have flashbacks to the past of right immediately after the accident happened, like the 7 hours during that time frame. And each of the side characters have their own point of view chapter from after this accident. And overall, I thought the book was okay. It was a slow burn, but more in the way of like, I found the majority of the book to be boring. And while they were all at the beach house, it didn't feel like a lot was happening, and I found that to be a bit pointless. I also felt like there were too many characters, and I didn't feel attached to any of them. Surprisingly, especially the main character. Like, there wasn't really anything about her that I liked. Like, she was just kind of there. Eventually, when we got to the climax around like the 60 to 70% mark, I did start to feel a bit of the paranoia along with the characters, which was fun. But ultimately, by the end, I felt like I still had questions on the things that were unresolved. And to me, the ending was a bit lackluster. And now moving on to the spoilers. If you haven't read this yet and you don't want anything ruined, stop now and come back after you've read it. For everyone else, let's go. My first initial thoughts on this one as I worked my way through the first few chapters was that the premise was stupid. I didn't understand why these characters all felt like they needed to see each other every year for an entire week. Like, as a working adult, that is a long time to spend with people you don't really even seem to like. And I didn't feel like the author got me to understand what they were doing and why every single year. Like, I just thought it was dumb. None of the characters seemed like they wanted to actually be there, and that made me, as the reader, not want to be there either. Like I said, there are a lot of characters in this book, so first let's do a breakdown of the characters. As for me, they were hard to tell apart in the beginning. I just thought there were too many of them, and it was just a lot of random people's names, and I was like, I don't know how to tell any of you apart. Okay, so first we have Cassidy. She is the main character. Throughout the book, I could definitely feel her paranoia, like in regards to all of the other characters. Like, she constantly felt like she was on the outs with the group, but that's because she literally was. Before the story started, she blocked all of their numbers and almost didn't show up for this weekly get-together. But we also learned that in high school, she was also sort of like invisible, and none of these people really knew who she was before this tragedy happened. Next, we have Amaya. She is the organizer of this yearly get-together, and on the first day of this week, she disappears from the beach house, but no one seems worried or concerned, and she's really not in the story much of the time, and that made me, as the reader, not care either. Next is Grace. She is now a therapist, and she's a bit of the group's calming aspect. Hollis, she is an Instagram fitness person. Mainly throughout the story, we just see her leaving the house a lot to go for runs or to go do yoga on the beach. Oliver, he owns the beach house, and he's now I think a hedge fund manager, whatever that is. Joshua seems to be the group's resident asshole. Throughout the book, he's pretty pissy with everybody, and he's also a lawyer. And lastly, of the alive members, we have Brody. Back when this accident had happened, he and Hollis had been dating. They're not anymore. He now has a baby with some other lady, but he's single and he's also an EMT. Then we have the two characters that initially had survived the accident with the core group, but they have since passed away. Clara threw herself into the river where this accident happened on the 1-year anniversary. She was also best friends with Grace. And lastly, Ian, he OD'd several months before this 10-year anniversary. We learn later that he and Cassidy had become close initially after the accident, but then they had drifted apart over the years. Those are the characters. They're a lot. I feel like it wasn't until like the halfway mark where I started being like, oh yeah, Hollis is the fitness girl, or like I felt like they all kind of had like, they were all just kind of the same. And it was hard for me to tell them apart, and I just could not stop thinking like, why are there so many characters? Like, I feel like it would have been way more impactful if there were just like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 characters, and then one of the 4 went missing, and then you actually notice throughout the story versus being like, who's missing? Why do we care? No one else cares. So for the actual story, it was broken down into the 7 days that they were at the beach house. Each day has multiple chapters in it, and they're all from Cassidy's point of view. To be honest, the vast majority of these chapters were boring. It was just her being paranoid, and none of the other characters really doing anything. I mean, they are on vacation for a week on the beach, so they're doing like vacation stuff, but then the majority of them are also still working remotely. Like, you could tell like they didn't want to actually be there because they're like on their phones and like on their laptops constantly, like not doing anything with each other. They're basically just working at a beach house. So not a lot of action during these chapters. Then between each of these days, there is a then chapter covering each of the 7 hours where they were surviving after the crash. Each hour is from a different point of view of each of the side characters. So it starts with hour 7, the very last hour that they were out there, and that's from Amaya's point of view. Then we move to hour 6 from Brody's point of view, etc., down to hour 1, which is from Cassidy's point of view. I didn't like how this timeline was told backwards. I found it confusing, and they built the story backwards, and by the time they were done with talking about, for example, Wednesday, we then would go to hour 6 of the tragedy, and I was just like, what is happening? Because in my mind, I thought the story was going to build off of the last time we were at the accident and move forward, but we were moving backwards from other people's point of view when they weren't always together. And so I was so confused. I had multiple times where I was like, when this book is over, I'm going to have to go back and read these sequences in order. But then I finished the book and I was like, I really want to. I love the idea of the reader being able to see like what happened after the accident, but the way it was written, it didn't feel like there was like any high stakes. Like, I didn't feel like I was worried about what was going to happen. Like, I knew the characters were concerned, but I didn't feel their like panic that you would think you would feel, you know? And the way it was told, it was hard for me to accurately picture like where they were, what was actually happening. And at the very end, you know that they are rescued. And so you're like, where do we go from here? Also, it felt lackluster because it was made pretty obvious pretty quickly that there were more classmates who had survived initially, and then they were slowly removed over the hours, either due to the elements surrounding them or the fact that they were injured. So the big deal of this pact that the surviving group made was that they told no one what actually happened out there, and that they basically caused some of their other classmates to die, and then didn't tell anybody when they were rescued that there had been other classmates that they were with. When they were rescued, they were just like, yeah, I don't know what happened to the 12 other people that were missing, and that it was their core group that was together the whole time, and all the missing people must have washed away immediately. Now, to be fair, some of those people were legitimately dead and swept away with the river and the vans or whatever from the very beginning. So for the setup of the crash, supposedly the 2 vans went over the guardrails of like a cliff, and then they crashed into this river in a ravine. But the shitty thing is, like, a handful of the classmates were just injured, but then the core group abandoned them when the group had trudged out of this ravine, and then they were eventually rescued. And when they got rescued, they didn't tell anybody that there had been other classmates. They're just like, yeah, I don't know. And it's like, they could have potentially told the rescuers, and then those injured people could have been rescued. But they didn't say anything. So that is the core sketchiness with this story. Like, why didn't this group say something? And that seems to be like what is haunting them. At some point, Cassidy realizes that this yearly gathering seems to not be like to check on one another, like, see, like, hey, how are you doing? But it's like to check on one another to make sure that no one's gonna blab. And she's just now realizing this like 10 years later. Like, she feels so out of the loop. Like, it seems so obvious that the rest of the group is like doing this, where they're like, hey, how's it been going? You been good? And she does not realize that like everybody's like been meeting up for a week over the last 10 years, literally to be like, you're not blabbing, are you? Okay, so now it's time for our week breakdown. This is how the story was told. We start with Sunday. Initially, Cassidy was going to skip the week this year, but an unsaved number sent her Ian's obituary. She didn't know that he was dead, and now she feels like she needs to go. She assumes that this text was from Amaya. So she has this boyfriend that's at home with her, and she lies to him, and she's like, I need to go on a work trip. And he's like, okay, bye. And they randomly check in throughout the story. So she drives to Outer Banks, which is where the house is. She arrives, and on the first day, apparently, it's always awkward between them all because, you know, they only see each other once a year, and none of them seem to want to be there. She's walking on the beach, and she finds this cell phone, and like a weirdo, she becomes, like, convinced that she needs to find the owner of this cell phone, even though it was in the tide and it's in the sand and it's all cracked. But then miraculously, after she charges it, it still works. It turns on, but anytime she tries to like do anything on the screen is like, no. So it works, but it doesn't work, you know, like it's like, it doesn't want to work because it's literally been out in the water for God knows how long. So basically by the end of this day, Amaya has just like dipped out. Her luggage is gone, her car is gone, she's just like, bye. Cassidy wants to find out if she's okay where she is. So she tries to call Amaya to see where'd you go. And so she figured that the number that had texted her earlier in the day, the obituary, was Amaya's, because she's the one that, you know, organizes all of this and everything. So she just assumes she's the one that texted me. She calls Amaya's number, and the mysterious cell phone that she found on the beach starts to ring. And my first initial thought was like, is that just Amaya's phone? It's not. But she's like, oh no, whose phone is this? She's like, if it wasn't Amaya that sent me that obituary, who did? Now we're on Monday. Cassidy is talking with Brody, and he asks her if she has been contacted by who the group assumes to be podcasters, who I guess want to do this tell-all with the group, but like to like find out like what happened that night. But they've been in group emails, and Josh has advised them just not to respond. But Cassidy didn't see these emails because she filtered all of their email addresses to go to her junk mail. So she decides to go back to her junk mail and read through the messages. In there, she sees a random email from Ian that she missed from a few days prior to him dying. And in this email, he says that he really needs to talk to her because she's the only one he can trust. But since she had the emails filtered to go into the junk mail, she completely missed this message. Didn't see it. And interestingly, at the bottom of the email, he put his phone number, and she realizes that this was the same number that had texted her Ian's obituary. So the phone that texted her at the beginning of the week, yesterday, I guess, was Ian's phone. but he's been dead for months. So the question becomes, who had his phone, who texted her, and then just ditched it on the beach? Tuesday, Cassidy goes to a phone repair place to get Ian's phone fixed, and the screen gets replaced and it magically works now. So she's looking through the photos of his phone and she sees that someone had been taking pictures of the outside of this house that they're staying in, like pretty much like right before she found the phone. She also learns from one of the neighbors around the neighborhood that the locals call this house the ghost house, and no one else stays there all throughout the whole year. Like literally 1 week a whole year is the only time the house is occupied, and it's by that, literally vacant 51 weeks a year. Wednesday. So on Wednesday, Cassidy talks with the local neighbor again, and she learns that he saw Ian at the house that winter, like a few months ago. And he also says that he saw Oliver on the pier before they all arrived on Saturday. And she's like, that's sus, because we all arrived before him and then he was the last of us to arrive. So this is where like her paranoia starts to kind of like increase. Like she's feeling like really fishy about Oliver. Then it starts storming pretty badly. The power goes out like in the whole town. The main roads are closed. Cassidy is worried because Amaya still hasn't come back. But it's Wednesday and she disappeared on like Sunday, and just now no one seems concerned. Like I don't feel like any of the characters like Cassidy. Like it just kind of feels like she's just there. And everyone is almost like, yeah, Cassidy. And they like ignore her being like, I'm worried about Amaya. And they're like, shut up. So now I think this is the point, but it was weird to read about a main character that wasn't main character material. Like where nobody like, it didn't seem like she was the main character because all of the other characters just kind of flitted around her and she wasn't ever really like seen. So Cassidy does some snooping around the house and she finds Ian's coat. And in the pocket, there's a receipt from when he was at the house in February. And then also, with more of her snooping, she finds a note under Amaya's bed that says, "Get out now." Dun, dun, dun. Paranoia increases. Now we're on Thursday. So around the 60% mark, things finally start to happen. Finally! So Cassidy goes to the town hotel to look for Amaya, finally, because they see that her car is there, and she finally is like, I'm just gonna go look for her. Where is this girl? And apparently, when she gets to this hotel, Josh is just there looking for her as well, knocking on all of the hotel doors and like showing them a picture, which was weird because he didn't seem concerned at all throughout the rest of the book that she was missing. But the picture that he's showing people is a picture of him and Amaya together, and Cassidy learns that they were something of an item at one point, but no one at the hotel recognizes her picture, so they go back to the house. So the power's back on at the house, and Cassidy goes to reset the Wi-Fi. While doing so, she finds a hidden camera. So then everything gets laid out on the table and the group has a confrontation. Everyone is like, the fuck, Oliver? Why are there cameras in your beach house? And he's like, guys, I swear I didn't know that that was there. So now the paranoia of the group really starts to increase. Oliver then reveals that Ian asked him to come to the house in February via email. When Oliver got there, he found Ian OD'd in Oliver's bed. None of them knew that he died in the house. Sorry, what? And this is crazy. Oliver didn't want to be involved. Like he didn't want like people to know that Ian had died in the house. So he loaded Ian's dead body into Ian's car, drove the car to a rest stop, and left him there. That is like sketchy as fuck, and I don't know how he got away with that. Like all of these months later, like nobody knew that. Like they just found him apparently OD'd in his car. That's crazy. Then Cassidy starts laying out all of these things that she knows. Like she tells them about Ian's phone and his jacket and the note that she found. And I was kind of thinking like, like, maybe you should leave some things to yourself. Like, you just told them basically everything that you've been trying to hide from them throughout the whole rest of the book, because previously you talked about about how you didn't trust them. But now, like, we're at the 60% mark, and now you're like, well, I found his jacket, and I found his phone, and look at this note. Like, why are you telling them everything? Suddenly, though, they all seem to get on the same side, and now they're all freaked out, and they all come to the conclusion that they must be being, like, watched by someone. So Cassie decides, finally, fuck this, I'm done. Like, which I'm like, why'd you come here in the first place? I don't understand. I don't feel the pull of why they were still gathering every single year. Like, I feel like that could have been executed better. Like, the whole time when I was reading about them being together, I'm just like, why are you here? None of you want to be here. None of you, like, want to talk to me. Like, why are we doing this? So since it's not storming anymore, she decides that she's going to be driving out tonight. She's going home. So the rest of the group is like, I don't want to leave tonight. We're going to leave in the morning. Except for Grace. She's like, bruh, can I come with you? Like, get me out of here. So off they go, away from the house in the middle of the night, basically. So they're driving through the night, and now we transition into Friday. So Cassidy and Grace had stayed overnight in a hotel, and then on Friday morning, Cassidy starts to drive Grace back to her parents' house in this same town where they had grown up at. So Cassidy starts actually questioning everything that happened 10 years previous. It's like she had ignored it for all of these years, and now she's interested in revisiting it because it seems like other people want to revisit it, i.e. the podcasters. So when they're in the car, she broaches this subject with Grace, being like, you know, Ben, one of the classmates, was fine, and then suddenly he wasn't. And Grace is like, well, no one can prove that. Grace is being sketchy. So she drops Grace off at her parents' house. She then stops at Ian's house, talks to his mom. While she's at Ian's, Cassidy finds this knife hidden away. And in all these previous flashbacks, this knife is something that had been continued to be brought up. Like, it kept getting passed from person to person. They didn't know what happened to it, but it was very important. So she makes it back to her apartment, and Josh is just there. Apparently the rest of the group also decided to leave the night previously, but they didn't stay overnight, and he's just in her apartment, rifling through her shit. So presumably he's looking for this knife. Apparently, like, over all of these years, they've all been concerned about this knife that, like, Cassidy was, like, super unaware of, and it's been in Ian's possession this whole time. They're talking, and she gets him to leave eventually, and he says that he's gonna go to Amaya's house to look for her. The scene of this tragedy, this accident, was in, like, the backwoods of Tennessee, apparently, and Amaya lives, like, in a cabin, like, very near the ravine of where this accident happened. So now we transition into Saturday. So she has journals that she had written all of the secrets of that night in, like, as a coping mechanism, and she realizes that they're missing. But she concludes that Josh couldn't have taken the journals because she didn't see them on him when he was leaving. So someone else has been in her apartment, and they found these very important journals and they took them. Then she's looking through Ian's phone, and she realizes that he has an app on his phone for the security camera that she had found from the beach house. There's only, like, a day's worth of footage on it, and it's from the night that he died. Apparently, Cassidy's current boyfriend, Russ, who wasn't really talked about much throughout the book, was who Ian was going to be meeting at the beach house. We learned that he was Clara's brother, who was one of the other people that had survived, but then she died, or she killed herself a year later. This whole time, Cassidy did not realize that Russ was Clara's brother. And then, like, after she, like, puts it together, she's like, they do look similar. And it's like, I'm pretty sure they had the same last name. Like, you're so stupid. How did you not realize So Russ has been trying to uncover what actually happened that night. And in this video footage, Ian mentions to Russ that Cassidy had these journals. She at one point had told Ian about the journals, and Ian's like, you should destroy those. And so he assumes that she did, and he tells Russ that she did, but she didn't. So Russ tracked Cassidy down, basically like fake dated her to steal the journals and to get the story so he could try to like figure out like the group's secrets, because he knew that Clara was keeping these secrets, and that's what eventually had led to her death. Like, she just couldn't take it anymore. So it clicks into place for Cassidy that Russ had Ian's phone after he died, and he's the one who texted Cassidy to get her to the beach house. He's been the one who has been trying to contact them all to try to get them to talk, etc., because he wants to know the truth. We also learn later that he was at the beach house at the same time as all of the other people. He was just staying in like the campgrounds where he could like watch them. I don't know what he was planning on accomplishing by doing this, because it felt like he almost had like so much of the story from her journals, but like he was still missing specific pieces. So he became like obsessed with trying to figure out the rest of the story. So at this point, the group gets a message from Amaya basically saying that she needs help. Surprise, surprise. It was Russ from her phone luring them all to Amaya's house. Again, it's in the ravine or whatever of where this accident happened. So they're all back at the scene of the original crime. Russ is convinced that this group collectively killed Clara instead of her killing herself. It comes out that Grace was with Clara when she threw herself into the river to kill herself, but Grace is adamant that she had nothing to do with it, that she didn't push her, but she also didn't stop her. And apparently Clara couldn't take the lies anymore. She wanted to admit to people that the group had killed Ben, one of the other classmates. Apparently, he and Brody were fighting. Ben got pushed into like Grace, and she was holding the knife, and it stabbed him. And throughout the flashbacks, like there were like the first few hours where Ben was like fine, and then suddenly some hours of the flashbacks, he like had this mysterious side wound. So he was stabbed or accidentally fell into a knife, I guess. So this reveal didn't actually feel like a reveal because none of them actually know what the truth is. So therefore, as the reader, we don't either. Like, like Grace is saying that like it was an accident, but was it actually an accident? We don't know. And then this ends with Cassidy being like, no, this whole thing is my fault. So we get her side of the story in a then flashback. It's like hour 1. So it's like right before the crash happens and then like right after it happens. So basically she believes it's her fault because these 2 vans were on the highway. It got busy. So they decided to take a detour through like these back country roads. So they're driving through the windy mountain roads. There's nowhere to turn around and stuff. And she asked them to stop because she was getting motion sick. And so she was going to throw up. So she's in the woods throwing up. And it turns out the freaking teachers forgot about her. And they start driving away in these vans, leaving her on the side of the road alone. So she had to sprint after the vans. And then she startled the drivers by like popping out basically. And that's how the crash happened. Some students like thought that it was a deer, but then you find out later that like Ian really knew the truth, but like he didn't really like say anything about it. But like basically they crashed because they saw her and was like, oh God, we forgot a student. And then they went over the cliff into the ravine. And then she jumped into the river to make it seem like she was with the group the whole time. It just made me like sad for her. Like it just felt like her whole existence in the story was like her being invisible. And because of her, all these people died. It's just not what I was expecting. I was like, what is happening? So now it's Sunday at midnight. In the end, there's like a tussle. Russ shoots Grace because he feels like she's responsible for Claire's death, but she's alive, but they're at the river bank, and then Cassidy lunges to save Grace. Russ falls into the river, dead. So the story ends with the group making a new pact to basically keep all of this a secret. I have so many issues with this ending. In Cassidy's narration, she makes it pretty clear that they're all still unsure of if Grace pushed Russ into the river or not. So that makes me question whether or not she actually also pushed Clara all of those years ago, even though she swears she didn't. But it's like, okay, but did you? And did you also push Russ? Like, I don't like that we actually don't get like a definite answer on that. And then along the same lines of that, we still aren't 100% sure on if Ben, the classmate, was stabbed on purpose or if he truly did just get pushed into the knife on accident. Also, Russ claimed that he didn't kill Ian. Apparently that night they had taken a break from talking and Russ found Ian outside overdosed, and then he carried him inside and he contacted Oliver from Ian's phone so that he would discover him. But I'm like, is that true? Like, that also seems a little off to me. So there were like so many other like little random things that I feel like were just like a little bit off that I don't feel like we got all of the answers for. And I can't tell if part of the fun is not knowing these things or if I truly did miss some context clues on what happened. Personally, though, I feel unfulfilled. I wanted definite answers, and even though these people claimed they didn't do whatever it is that they were accused of, as the reader, I can't believe them because they've all been keeping these secrets and lying for years. So what is the point of the novel? We won't ever truly know, like, did they do it or not? So let me know your thoughts on this one. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? How do you feel about the ending? Like, does anyone else feel like they missed something here, or is it just me? As always, thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.